So guys, I did a keys to victory video where I discussed the tactics I would tell both fighters to use for Deontay Wilder versus Alexander Povetkin the other day. And I wanted to do another one on David Haye versus Arnold Jar Jar and Shannon Briggs versus Dimitrenko. I'm going to come on to official prediction videos, however you want to phrase it, next week when we discuss that. But let me talk about these two fights. Let me tell you what advice I would be giving these two fighters if I were in their corner. Let's start with Briggs versus Dimitrenko. If I was Dimitrenko, a key to victory here is stay at range in the first 2 to 3 rounds. If you watch Shannon Briggs versus Rafael Zambano Love, which was the recent fight of Briggs's that went several rounds, it's certainly clear to me that Briggs is at his most dangerous in the first couple of rounds. You know, Shannon Briggs is a guy who still carries a lot of punching power. He can be very aggressive. He can be quite explosive in the early rounds of fights. But for my money, after the early rounds, he becomes low volume. He becomes less explosive and really less threatening. After the early rounds. And I think the key here is for Dimitrenko to use range early on. Dimitrenko is a massive guy. He's 6'7", 6'8", something like that. He's a lot bigger than Shannon Briggs. And if he can keep the distance between the two, he can stay out of danger when Briggs is at his most dangerous. Dimitrenko's got to use his feet. He's got to not be stationary. He can't be too lumbering big man. You know, he's got to keep the gap there, and he's got to use the jab. Try and keep Shannon Briggs at range. Try and dissuade him in the early rounds by hitting him with a constant stick in the form of the jab. For me, that's absolutely key. If I was Dimitrenko, I would not focus on anything in the first 2 or 3 rounds other than not getting knocked out. I would not have any concern whatsoever if Briggs was 3-0 up after 3 rounds here. That would be a key for me. Survive the early rounds. I would then start to try and come into the fight, rounds 4, rounds 5, etc. and start picking up rounds then. Again, I'd do it behind the jab. For me, this fight, if Shannon Briggs tires, if he becomes less explosive, less mobile, he's going to be able to be picked off from the outside by a bigger man like Dimitrenko. Dimitrenko's bigger, he's younger, he's coming off a lot of good wins, and I think that is the key to victory for Dimitrenko here. Avoid Briggs early on, even if it involves sacrificing the rounds, then start to raise your output, open up, use your jab and fight from the outside after you survive the initial onslaught. For Shannon Briggs, what is the key to victory? Well, the obvious key to victory is knock Dimitrenko out. I think you've got more first round knockouts than any other fighter in the history of heavyweight boxing. You've got to close down that gap and you've got to take Dimitrenko out early. Don't let him get into the fight. Don't let him establish the jab. Don't let him fit into a comfort zone, and get him out when you know you're at your most deadly, which is the first round. So Shannon Briggs got to put the pedal to the metal straight away, and he's got to know that at his age, the way he fights, he's probably not going to be picking up the late rounds of this fight. So he's got to do damage early. He's got to shake Dimitrenko up, hurt him, put him back in his box early on. Closing down the distance is a real key to Shannon Briggs. Obviously, Dimitrenko being such a tall, rangy guy, he's going to try and fight from the range. He's going to try and keep Briggs off him. Briggs isn't the fastest guy these days, but he's got to have the footwork, he's got to have the positioning, he's got to have the timing to get inside and make sure he's not standing at the end of Dimitrenko's jab. When I did my keys to victory video, I talked for Wilder Povetkin. I said that for me, the key to victory for both men was actually range in the fight. And I think similarly in this fight, range is absolutely vital. If we see Briggs pressuring Dimitrenko, cutting down the ring, getting inside of his jab, Briggs will probably win by knockout. If we see Dimitrenko keeping Briggs at range, staying out of his way, negating Briggs' game, it's very easy work for Dimitrenko. So I think that's the keys to victories for both men. Dimitrenko spacing and the jab, Briggs early power and closing down the range. Dimitrenko's got to try and survive the early onslaught and make this fight go long, and see how much Shannon Briggs at his age has left going into the 4th and 5th round, and start to up the pace then in my book. Let's talk David Haye versus Arnold Jar Jar. It's kind of hard to pick keys to victory for Arnold Jar Jar. I guess the key to victory would be hoping David Haye breaks his hand, or hoping David Haye gets a cut, or hoping David Haye gets hit by a bus on the way to the stadium. You know, I'm not going to give away the prediction during this video, but you wouldn't have to be you wouldn't have to be telepathic to work out what route I'm going in this fight. But you know, if I was in the position of being a cornerman for Jar Jar, and it wouldn't be I wouldn't be too envious of that person's job. I'd look at David Haye and I'd think, in the past, David Haye has been low volume against taller guys. Saw what happened when he fought Valiev, saw what happened when he fought Klitschko, even to a lesser extent what happened when he fought Audley Harrison. He became tentative, didn't want to eat the jab, wanted to stay at range, and you know, dropped his output. David Haye's always been at his most deadly against short fighters, Chisora, Ruiz, even Demore. You know, and I'd be thinking, if I was Jar Jar, David Haye's done one round in the last 4 years. What I'm going to try and do is survive the first 3 or 4 rounds. We know David Haye's got tremendous power, and see where we go from there. That would be my thought process if I was Jar Jar. So I think what he's got to do is come out and establish that jab very, very early on. He's got to look at David Haye against tall opponents in the past, and he's got to hope that somehow David Haye will be tentative, become a bit low output, you know. Even like what David Haye did in the Audley Harrison fight. You know, Audley Harrison threw nothing at all, but David Haye was extremely low volume himself in that fight. And I guess Jar Jar's got to hope that the fight can break down in a similar way, with a view to testing David Haye out later on in the fight. You know, knowing that David Haye's had a lot of injuries, knowing that David Haye's had literally zero activity, less than a single round over the course of 4 years or so. And I think that's got to be Jar Jar's tactic here. He's not going to go out and outbox David Haye. I don't think he's got big power, Jar Jar. I'm not convinced about his chin, so I think he's got to come out, he's got to get the jab going straight away, and he's got to try and give David Haye something to think about behind a jab, and hope that makes Haye low volume. I'm clutching at straws, as you can probably tell. What's the key to victory for David Haye? It's simple: hitting on Jar Jar. You know, we saw this guy get put down twice by Denis Baktov, and as I said in my initial video when the fight was announced, Baktov looked like Mike Tyson in that fight. Jar Jar was very basic indeed there, and I thought Baktov was giving him all sorts of bother. I think if David Haye can come out, get involved in a scrap early on, walk Jar Jar down, get inside of range, I think all he's got to do is land 1 or 2 of those haymakers and it's game over. I'm not 100% convinced about David Haye on his comeback just yet. I need to see a bit more. But what I am convinced about is that David Haye, who beat Mark Demore, has enough to beat Arnold Jar Jar. And for me, it's really hard to discuss keys to victory in too much detail. I just think David Haye can't allow this, can't allow himself to come low volume against a taller guy. He should come out, he should be the aggressor, he should take the centre of the ring, and once he starts putting the combinations together, I think Jar Jar's going to be out of there. That's my thoughts on these 2 fights. For what it's worth, Dimitrenko-Briggs is actually the more intriguing fight, and I think Briggs is actually fighting a better man in Dimitrenko than David Haye is in Arnold Jar Jar. I'm going to do final prediction videos on all of these fights in the next week, and we're going to cover them on next Wednesday's podcast. So if you're new to the channel, if you haven't watched these videos before, please do hit the subscribe button so you can follow all of the build-up on the channel ahead of these fights. But yeah, that's my thought really. I guess maybe I'm overstating range, but I think in all of these heavyweight fights at the minute, range is absolutely key. If Dimitrenko-Briggs, I think you can probably decide who's going to win that fight in the first minute of the first round based on what range it's being fought at. And I know in heavyweight boxing you get people of vastly different sizes, whereas in the other weight classes it's somewhat more uniform. So that's probably why I'm labouring the point on range so much. But yeah, that's an interesting fight, that is. And if Briggs is to be successful, it'll be the best win on his record for many a year. So we shall see how it goes. Anyway, I'm rambling. Guys, if you've enjoyed the vid, please support the channel by hitting the thumbs up button and liking it. As I say, hit subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.